"We're not funding this circus," my mom said, calm, cutting, final. My wedding plans, my future, all erased with one sentence. My sister didn't even blink. "Better luck next time," she added, smirking like it was a joke. Dad stayed silent the way he always did when she decided who I was allowed to be. I could have screamed. Instead, I said one word, understood, and walked out. They thought I'd break. They thought I'd crawl back like always. But 3 weeks later, when their world started to collapse, they finally learned what that word really meant. And it began with a single phone call. From the outside, my family looked like the kind people envied. Brick house, polished smiles. Sunday dinners no one dared miss, but inside every laugh came with a rule attached. My mother, Carol, built our lives on control how we spoke, dressed, dated, even what we dreamed. My father, Robert, followed her lead, the quiet echo behind every decision. And my sister, Shannon, she could do no wrong. When we were kids, I wanted to design dresses. I'd fill sketchbooks with fabrics and colors. One afternoon, Mom found my drawings, held them like evidence, then tossed them straight into the trash. "You're not wasting your life on fantasies," she said. My father just stood there nodding like he agreed. That day I learned silence could keep the peace. Years passed. I became what they wanted, an accountant, steady, safe. Shannon went to college for marketing, creative enough to sound respectable. When she opened her boutique, Mom threw her a party boasting about her daughter's vision. I remember watching them toast under string lights, Mom's pearls glinting as she said, "You've always had flair." Flair. The word still stings. Mine was never allowed. Then came Eric. I met him at a community fundraiser, the kind of event my parents called small-town nonsense. He worked for a nonprofit, mentoring kids, laughed too easily, asked real questions. With him, I felt seen not as a project, but as a person. The first time I brought him home, Mom's smile froze halfway. So she said, "What do you do?" when he explained, her lips curved into something polite but cold. "How admirable," Dad muttered. "At least he's kind." Shannon just whispered, "Ambition's optional, I guess," and giggled. For 3 years, Eric stood by me through their quiet judgment. We planned our wedding carefully, responsibly. The Ivy House, beautiful but modest, was our dream venue. We saved every dollar ourselves. When Mom offered to help, I thought maybe she'd changed. She said she wanted the best for me. I should have known better. That morning when she called me back to the house, I thought it was about flowers or catering, not war. The moment I walked in, I felt it, the tension, the silence before the blade. She stood by the fireplace, arms folded. Shannon sprawled across the couch, scrolling through her phone. Dad stared at the rug. "We're not funding this circus," Mom declared. "Better luck next time," Shannon added without looking up. The words hit like a slap, sharp, humiliating, deliberate. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I didn't let them see it. I straightened my back, nodded once, and said, "Understood." The room went still. Mom blinked, confused. Shannon smirked, sure I'd given up. But what they didn't know was that silence was no longer my surrender. The drive back to my apartment felt endless. The sky hung low, gray, and heavy, the kind that made the world look smaller. My phone buzzed the whole way, Eric calling, but I couldn't answer. I needed the quiet, the hum of the road to steady me. By the time I reached home, my hands had stopped shaking. Mostly. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter, cream paper gold trim, our names printed side by side. I stared at them for a long time before sweeping the whole stack into a box. It wasn't anger yet, just numbness. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. Eric showed up that evening, his face worried but gentle. "What happened?" "They canceled it," I said, flatly. He blinked. "Canceled. They can't just—" "They did. Called the venue, the florist, everything. It's done." He stepped closer, searching my face. "Do you want me to go talk to them?" I shook my head. "No. This time it's my turn." Later that night, I found myself flipping through an old drawer. At the very bottom was my high school sketchbook, the one Mom had thrown away years ago. The edges were bent, pages smudged with pencil lines. Dresses, blazers, shoes, all the things I used to love before she told me not to. I traced one sketch with my finger and felt the burn of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Defiance. The word understood echoed in my head. It used to mean surrender. It meant you win. But not this time. Not anymore. I thought about every understood I'd ever said when she chose my college major, when she said accounting was respectable, when she told me love should look like money and status. Every understood was a piece of me she'd taken. That night I wrote a list. Every account, every payment, every contract connected to the wedding. Something didn't feel right, too precise, too immediate. You don't cancel a full event that fast without preparation. I called the Ivy House the next morning. The coordinator hesitated before answering. "I'm sorry, Ms. Perry, but your mother already sent us your signed cancellation notice." What I asked. She paused. "It had your signature." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at my reflection in the dark phone screen. Someone had forged my name. My family hadn't just canceled my wedding, they'd erased me from it entirely. I drove straight to Diane Cole's office the next morning. She'd been my company's attorney once, sharp and unshakable, the kind of woman who looked like she'd been born in a courtroom. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp or frown, she just started writing. "Show me the paperwork," she said. I handed her every file I had, payments, invoices, the original contract for the Ivy House. Diane flipped through each page pen, tapping against the desk in steady rhythm. Then she froze. "This cancellation form," she murmured, holding it up. "That's not your handwriting." I leaned closer. My name was there, sprawled across the page in clumsy ink. My signature, but not. Diane looked up, her eyes sharp. "Someone forged it. And if they used your financial info to make payments, that's a crime." The word crime hit me like a cold slap. I wasn't just dealing with manipulation anymore. This was theft, deliberate, calculated. We spent hours combing through details, every transaction, every withdrawal from the wedding account. And that's when we saw thousands of dollars wired to Shannon Perry, Designs Her Boutique. Another trail led to my parents' credit card payments and home renovations. "They used your money to cover their debts," Diane said, "and I'll bet it gets worse." That night I sat in the dark with only my laptop screen lighting the room. I replayed every moment in my head, Mom's cold tone, Shannon's smirk, Dad's silence. It all clicked into place. The wedding wasn't just a power move. It was a cover-up. The next day, my phone rang. Uncle Stephen's name flashed across the screen. We hadn't spoken in months, but his voice was tight, uneasy. "Eleanor, there's something you need to know," he said. "It's about your grandfather's trust fund." I froze. "What about it?" "He set it up years ago. $250,000. It's yours, but it activates only when you marry. Your parents have been managing it and withdrawing from it." I checked the records myself. The air left my lungs. "You're saying they've been using the money for years," Stephen said softly. "Shannon's business, the house remodel, all from your trust. If you'd gotten married, it would have triggered a full audit. They had to stop it." I pressed a hand over my mouth. My own family hadn't just stolen from me. They'd destroyed my future to keep it hidden. After the call, I sat still for a long time. The anger came slowly, quietly, like a storm forming over still water. I opened my laptop, typed a message to Diane. "We're filing the case." Then I whispered to no one but myself. They wanted control. Now they'll get consequences. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Rows of strangers whispered behind me, the hum of air conditioning drowning out my heartbeat. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Diane, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached. Across the aisle, my family looked smaller than I remembered. Mom's hair was perfect as always, but her pearls didn't shine the same under fluorescent light. Dad's tie was crooked. Shannon scrolled on her phone until the bailiff told her to stop. When the judge entered, everyone stood. "Case number 4721. Perry versus Perry," the clerk announced. The words stung more than I'd expected. Diane began calmly. "Your Honor, this case involves the unauthorized use of my client's financial assets and a forged signature on legally binding documents. We intend to show that Eleanor Perry's parents and sister not only interfered with her wedding plans, but also misappropriated her inheritance." Mom leaned toward her attorney, whispering something sharp. She didn't like losing control of the story. Diane laid out everything: the forged cancellation form, the bank withdrawals, the payments funneled to Shannon's boutique. She passed copies to the judge, each page landing with a soft, deliberate slap. Then came the trust fund. Uncle Stephen took the stand, looking uneasy in his suit. My father, Eleanor's grandfather, set up a trust of $250,000 for her. It would release upon her marriage. I recently discovered funds missing. Who withdrew them? Diane asked. He swallowed hard. Robert and Carol Perry. The courtroom rippled. Mom's lawyer objected. Irrelevant. The fund was managed within family rights. Diane's tone stayed calm. Family rights don't cover fraud. Mom's eyes darted toward me, sharp and cold. You don't understand, Eleanor. We were trying to protect you. That boy Eric, he's beneath you. He would have dragged you down. I met her gaze. Protect me by stealing from me. Her voice cracked. We only used what we needed. Shannon was drowning in debt. We couldn't just let her fail. Maybe she should have, I said quietly. Maybe it would have taught her what accountability looks like. Shannon slammed her hand on the table. You think you're better than us? You've always been the boring one. Our parents did everything for you. The judge rapped his gavel once. Order. Diane turned to Shannon. Miss Perry, did your parents transfer any of your boutique expenses from Eleanor's trust? Shannon hesitated, her confidence fading. I didn't know where the money came from. Really? Diane lifted a document. Because this invoice for your boutique renovation lists your father's signature and Eleanor's trust account number. Shannon's face drained of color. By the time Diane rested her case, every secret was on the table. Mom tried to play the martyr, Dad mumbled half-hearted apologies, and Shannon cried into a tissue she didn't really use. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was steady, cold, final. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. All funds misappropriated from the trust are to be returned immediately. Additional damages of $50,000 will be awarded for fraud and emotional distress. Mom's breath hitched. Dad's shoulders collapsed. Shannon stared at me with pure disbelief. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled for the first time in months. Outside the courthouse, the sky was clear, a rare blue that felt almost staged. Reporters weren't there. No crowd, just quiet. Diane turned to me. You did it. I just stopped them, I said. That's all. A week later, I stood at the Ivy House again, the same archway where my mother's words had haunted me, but this time it was mine. The garden lights flickered softly, tables draped in white linen, simple and elegant. Eric waited at the end of the aisle, his tie slightly crooked, his smile unwavering. Owen waved from the second row. Uncle Stephen gave a proud nod, and Diane, who never smiled much, actually did. When the music started, I felt my throat tighten. No mother adjusting my veil, no father walking me down the aisle, just me walking myself. Every step felt like reclaiming something stolen. As I reached Eric, he whispered, "You okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said and meant it. We said our vows quietly, not for show, not for anyone else. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and for a moment all I could hear was the wind through the ivy and the faint sound of laughter, real laughter. After the ceremony, I slipped away for a moment, standing beneath the same oak tree where I once cried after everything fell apart. I looked up at the lights and thought about how silence had become my weapon. My mother once called my wedding a circus. Now it was peace. Inside, music and warmth filled the air. Eric caught my hand and pulled me to dance. The world blurred faces, lights, all of it. When the night ended, I wrote one last email. Simple, clean. Carol, Robert, Shannon. The court showed who you are. I wish you the best, but this is goodbye. I hovered for a second, then hit send. Outside, crickets hummed. Eric wrapped his arm around me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. A few weeks later, the calls began. First Mom, then Dad, then Shannon. Each one left a message that sounded the same: soft voices, forced apologies, a little tremble for sympathy. "We just want to talk, sweetheart. Can we meet just once?" Things got out of hand. I didn't answer. The phone buzzed on the counter while I folded laundry, cooked dinner, lived my life. Every vibration felt weaker than the last. Then came the voicemail that made me pause. Mom's voice, brittle and tired. "Your father lost his job. Shannon's boutique. It's gone. We're trying to start over. We need help. I stared at the wall, not angry anymore, just hollow. They had taken enough. From Owen, I later heard the full story. Dad laid off after a scandal. Mom working part-time at a department store, Shannon drowning in debt. The same people who once dictated my life couldn't even keep their own afloat. One night, the calls started again, back to back to back. The screen lit up with their names. I picked it up, typed slowly, and sent one text. The circus is already full. Then I placed the phone face down, poured myself a glass of wine, and went back to sketching under the soft kitchen light. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, warm and quiet. Eric kissed my forehead before leaving for work, and I sat at my desk surrounded by fabric swatches and half-finished sketches. My first design line was taking shape, mine, not theirs. Freedom didn't feel loud. It felt still, steady, earned. I glanced at my phone on the table, no new calls, no apologies, just silence. The kind that finally meant peace. Mom once said my wedding was a circus. Maybe she was right, because now the show was over and I was the one who walked away smiling. If you've ever had to choose yourself over family, tell me in the comments. Hit subscribe. There's always another story to tell.
I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even suspicious yet. That's the part that still feels unreal. It was a slow Thursday night, the kind where time crawls, and the walls hum with the kind of silence that makes you think everything's fine. My boyfriend Alan was out with his coworkers for just one drink. I was home doing what I usually did, folding his shirts, checking if the sheets were dry, making sure his favorite dinner leftovers were wrapped and ready in the fridge. The small invisible things you do when you love someone who says thank you without looking up from his phone. My laptop was charging in the bedroom, so I borrowed his. Just for a minute. I only needed to open a browser window to find a recipe, that's all. Then it happened, the sound. Ding. A small, harmless Facebook notification in the corner of the screen. Alan K. 22, new messages in Healing Hearts Anonymous. At first I smiled. I thought maybe it was some kind of men's support group. After his last breakup with his ex Sienna, he'd gone through therapy and online healing spaces. I was glad he still had an outlet. I really was. But then a preview line popped up beneath the title. He's nice, but honestly I'm just waiting for Sienna to come back. I stared at it, the cursor blinking on the screen, as if it were breathing in sync with my heart. Then I felt the smallest, sharpest chill at the base of my spine. It had to be a mistake, right? Maybe he commented on someone else's post. Maybe this wasn't his. But then I saw his name, Alan K., and his profile picture, the one from our anniversary trip last fall. The one where he'd held me under a string of fairy lights, smiling like forever meant something. The air thickened. I clicked. The page loaded, and there it was, a thread full of his words, his confessions, his jokes. Cindy's great, but she's not her. You know, I don't even feel anything anymore. It's like living in someone else's house. She tries so hard, bless her heart. I just don't have it in me. Each post was another cut. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I kept scrolling, reading comments from strangers, laughing emojis, bro. I get you, one woman writing. That poor girl probably thinks she's the one. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there frozen in a body that suddenly didn't belong to me. For nearly 3 years, I'd been the one steady thing in Alan's chaos. I met him after Sienna had shattered him, the ex who left him for a woman she'd met on a work trip. He was heartbroken, raw, humiliated. I had been the patient one, the one who listened, the one who held him through his panic attacks, helped him rebuild, encouraged him to go back to school to start over. I helped him find his footing. I celebrated his little wins. I even co-signed his lease when he said he couldn't afford a place alone. Every step I told myself love was worth effort. Love was work. Love was choosing someone every day, even when it got heavy. But as I read through his words, the truth finally uncoiled. I wasn't his partner. I was his landing pad, his recovery project, his emotional rehab center. He'd given me a promise ring 3 months ago. Not a proposal, just a promise. I'd cried when he slipped it on my finger, thinking it meant stability. But now, staring at the screen, I realized it had been guilt dressed as love. I felt the world tilt, not violently, just enough to make everything blurry. You know that feeling when something breaks quietly, when it doesn't shatter, it just stops working. That's what it felt like inside my chest. I didn't scream, didn't call him, didn't throw the laptop. I just closed the browser, sat back and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket that suddenly felt too heavy. That night I opened Google Docs and typed the title, Exit plan. And then I started writing. Screenshot every post. Check archived messages. Backup documents. Change locks. Cancel joint utilities. Leave the ring. Each task typed with calm precision. No rage, no theatrics, just logic. I used to think heartbreak would sound like glass breaking, but sometimes it's quieter, like a mouse click in an empty apartment. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page, waiting for more. Outside, rain began to fall soft and steady like punctuation marks on the end of something sacred. I leaned back, stared at the screen, and whispered to no one, "I'm done." Then I saved the file, shut the laptop, and waited for morning for him to come home, for the world to pretend nothing had changed while I quietly planned to make sure everything did. When Alan came home the next morning, the first thing I noticed was how ordinary he looked. Hair slightly tousled, shirt half tucked in, eyes heavy, from what he probably called just one beer too many. He smiled when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand. "Morning, babe," he said, voice low and easy. "Did you remember to pay the power bill?" I looked up from the cup, watching steam curl between us, like the ghost of everything I hadn't said. "Yeah," I answered. "Paid it yesterday." He nodded, distracted, already scrolling through his phone as he leaned against the counter. I waited for even a flicker of guilt, some sign that he felt what I'd seen the night before, but there was nothing. Just that casual, comfortable indifference that comes from knowing someone loves you enough to never leave. If he noticed the tightness in my smile, he didn't mention it. He walked past me, brushed a kiss against the top of my head, and said, "You're the best." I sat perfectly still as he disappeared down the hallway, and in that moment, something inside me stopped wanting to be his best anything. While he napped later, I moved like a shadow through our apartment. Quiet, efficient, unseen. It's strange how quickly the human heart can shift from devotion to detachment, how someone's laugh can still echo down the hall while you're packing your memories into boxes. I started with the drawers, the ones that held both of our lives tangled together. His old band t-shirts, the ones I'd folded for years, neatly stacked beside my sweaters. The smell of his cologne clung to the air, familiar and wrong, all at once. I took only what was mine: my clothes, my laptop, the books with my notes in the margins, the tiny ceramic cup I'd made in college. Everything else I left, his untouched. Then I opened his laptop again, not out of curiosity, out of confirmation. I needed to see if what I'd read was isolated, a slip of pain, maybe regret. It wasn't. Buried deep in his messenger archive below, a string of grocery reminders and apartment chatter, were messages from Sienna, the ex, the ghost he swore he'd buried. "You still cross my mind sometimes. She's good for you. Stable. You need that. You try so hard to love her. It's sweet." And his reply dated just 2 weeks after he'd given me that ring. "If you told me to come back, I would." That was all it took for the air to vanish from my lungs. I clicked print all, watched each page slide out of the printer like a confession I didn't ask for. The sound filled the apartment, small mechanical sighs, one after another. While the pages printed, I opened a folder on my computer titled Exit Plan. Inside, I created subfolders: screenshots, texts, receipts, lease transfer docs. The precision calmed me. Each step was a heartbeat, each file a reminder that this was no longer about heartbreak, it was about closure. At noon, I called my manager and said I had a family emergency. That wasn't a lie. When your relationship dies overnight and you're the only one attending the funeral, that's an emergency. Alan woke up briefly when I walked into the bedroom. He mumbled, "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said softly, zipping up my suitcase. "Everything's fine." He smiled, half asleep, unaware that every item leaving the apartment was another goodbye he'd never hear. By 3, I'd packed what was left of my life into the backseat of my car. By 4, I'd boxed up the rest, neatly, respectfully. On his nightstand, I placed the small velvet box that once held the promise ring he'd given me. Inside, I put the ring and a note. Just one line written in blue ink. "You were right. I was your safety net. Now the floor is yours." Behind it, I tucked the folder, printed screenshots, messenger logs, photos, and a letter of termination for the lease already signed. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I wasn't the type of woman who needed an audience for her pain. At 4:15, I set the apartment keys in the mailbox, pressed send on the email to our landlord, and turned the ignition. No dramatic music, no chase, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a door, closing somewhere deep inside you. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror, because what was behind me wasn't home anymore, it was evidence. Evidence that I had loved someone who only ever wanted to be pitied. Evidence that I had mistaken endurance for devotion. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. Empty, yes, but empty is how freedom begins. The first 24 hours of silence were the hardest. Not because I missed him, but because I was waiting for the noise. I knew Alan. He was predictable, the kind of man who couldn't stand not having the last word. So when my phone stayed still, no calls, no messages, I assumed he was trying to punish me with distance. It was his favorite game, wait for me to fold first. But by the second day, the notifications started. Cindy, where are you? Why is all your stuff gone? What's this folder you left me? This isn't what you think. Then came the shift, the same rhythm I'd heard in every argument we ever had. Confusion first, then defensiveness, then guilt, then anger. Those posts were jokes, Cindy. You're taking them too seriously. You violated my privacy. I can't believe you just left like that. Real mature. The irony almost made me laugh. He was furious not because of what he'd done, but because I'd seen it. I didn't respond, not once. I turned off read receipts, muted every app, and let my silence echo. The longer I stayed quiet, the louder his panic became. He called me dramatic, then cold, then manipulative. And finally, when none of it worked, he tried to sound broken. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. You know me, Cindy. You know I say dumb things when I'm frustrated. Can we just meet for coffee? Please. I didn't go. I didn't text. I didn't even block him. Blocking would have been too much engagement, too much acknowledgement. Instead, I did something worse. I disappeared completely. I moved into a small studio apartment across town, the kind with peeling wallpaper and a window that opened to an alley full of echoes. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. No shared bills, no shared passwords, no shared air. In the quiet, I learned how to breathe again. I cooked for one, slept in the middle of the bed, stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. Every day, his voice faded a little more until it became nothing but background static. But the funny thing about silence is that people think it's weakness until it starts working. By the end of the first week, the messages slowed. Then they changed tone. You can't just ghost me like this. It's cruel. You owe me a conversation. This is emotional abuse, Cindy. He was weaponizing the very language I'd once used to defend him. It was always his pattern twist the story cast himself as the wounded one. Still, I said nothing. You learn a lot about people when you give them silence. You see what they do when the mirror stops flattering them. In the old days, I would have written back, explained, tried to reason with him, soothe him, save him from his own mess. But I'd spent too long being the woman who explained herself to people who'd already decided not to listen. Not anymore. I left my phone on the nightstand that night and stared at the ceiling, the faint sound of city traffic humming through the cracked window. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like ownership. Somewhere out there, Alan was unraveling, probably telling mutual friends half-truths about how I overreacted. Maybe showing them the note I'd left, pretending it was proof I'd lost my mind. But I didn't care, because silence, when you use it right, becomes truth's best translator. I remember reading somewhere that grief doesn't always come after death. Sometimes it shows up after clarity, when you finally realize the person you loved was just a lesson wearing a familiar face. I thought about that when I lay in bed that night, staring at the crack in my ceiling, shaped vaguely like a heart. I smiled, because maybe finally I understood what healing actually sounded like. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't revenge, it was the sound of nothing at all. It had been almost a month since I left when the message came. Not from Alan, that would have been too easy. This one was from Jason, one of his oldest friends. The kind of guy who always hovered at the edges of our relationship, polite, quiet, loyal to Alan by default. We never spoke much outside of birthdays and group dinners. So when his name popped up on my screen that night, I hesitated before opening it. Hey, Cindy, I know this is random. You probably don't want to hear from anyone connected to him right now, but you should see this. Attached was a screenshot, a private group chat between Alan, Jason, and a few of their mutual friends. The first message was from Alan. She ghosted me like I was nothing, after everything I did for her. Then another. She's unstable, man. She went through my stuff, printed things, left this dramatic note like some movie character. Total overreaction. Each line twisted the story, carefully rewritten so he could still be the good guy, the reliable one, the victim of an emotional woman who just couldn't handle reality. Jason didn't add commentary, but he didn't need to. The screenshot said enough. Below it, he'd written only one sentence. I saw the folder you left him. He showed it to us thinking we'd take his side. We didn't. My breath caught. You didn't, I typed back before I could stop myself. His reply came seconds later. No. Once we saw what he'd posted about you, the messages to Sienna, it was disgusting. You didn't deserve that, Cindy. I just wanted you to know I get it now. I stared at the words, the edges of the screen blurring slightly. Jason, the man who once laughed at Alan's jokes about sensitive women, was apologizing. Not for him, but for himself. Thank you, I wrote back. Nothing more. He heart-reacted to the message. And that was it. No long explanations, no promises of redemption. Just an acknowledgement, one that felt heavier than any apology Alan could have offered. It was strange. I'd spent weeks in silence, thinking my disappearance existed in a vacuum. But now I realized the silence had begun to echo in places I couldn't see. People were talking, not because I'd told my side, but because truth has a way of slipping through even the tightest lies. Over the next few days, small things started surfacing through mutual acquaintances. A mutual friend quietly unfollowed Alan. Another removed old photos. Someone else sent me a vague message. Good for you for getting out. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't have to. The story was unraveling on its own. That's the thing about men like Alan, they survive on performance, on curating the narrative. The moment their mask slips, their audience vanishes. And he had slipped. He'd built his identity on being the nice guy who always gets hurt. But now, people had seen behind the curtain, and what they saw wasn't heartbreak, it was hypocrisy. I imagined him reading those chat messages in real time, watching his friend's silence stretch longer than usual, realizing too late that they weren't agreeing with him anymore. For the first time, I felt something close to pity. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry that people finally saw him for who he was. That night, I sat by the window of my tiny apartment, lights off, rain drumming softly against the glass. The city outside was a blur of yellow headlights and wet pavement. I thought about how peace doesn't always arrive, wrapped in happiness. Sometimes it comes disguised as distance. My phone buzzed again. Jason, one more message. For what it's worth, he's not taking it well. Keeps saying you ruined his life. But I think he's finally realizing he did that himself. I didn't respond. I didn't even smile. I just set the phone down and whispered to the dark. He's not the only one who realized something. Because what I realized sitting there under the soft hum of a city that didn't care was that I didn't need to fight for truth anymore. The story was no longer his to control. And maybe that was the real justice, watching him lose not just me, but the version of reality he'd built to keep himself safe. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. I poured myself a glass of wine, stared out the window, and let the rain drown out whatever echoes of him still lived in my head. For the first time, silence didn't feel like the absence of sound. It felt like the presence of peace. It was a Friday evening in early spring, the kind of day where everything looks deceptively calm. I had just finished grocery shopping, filling my cart with simple things, fruit, coffee, a new plant for my windowsill. The kind of quiet, ordinary errands that mark a new life. I was halfway across the parking lot when I saw him. Alan. He was leaning against a silver sedan a few rows away, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes fixed on me, like he'd been standing there for hours. The sight stopped me cold. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence, like the world had finally caught up to the version of him he pretended to be. Cindy, he said, voice low, tentative. I didn't move closer. Just tightened my grip on the grocery bag and waited. He took a hesitant step forward. I wanted to talk. Please. There it was, that word. Please. He'd always used it like a key, expecting it to open every locked door. I didn't respond, so he filled the silence himself. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. My voice came out calm, flat. There's nothing to explain. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. It was stupid. I know. I was venting. You know how people talk online, exaggerating things for laughs. It didn't mean anything. I stared at him, letting the air stretch thin between us. You wrote that I was a practice run. A soft place to land. How's that funny, Alan? He blinked, words faltering. It was taken out of context. Your exact words were, she's nice to practice on until someone serious shows up. I stepped closer, then just enough for him to see that I remembered every syllable. What context makes that better? His jaw tightened. He looked around like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. I was frustrated. Okay, I felt trapped. I didn't know how to say I wasn't happy. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. You didn't know how to say it, so you performed it for strangers. That's not honesty, Alan. That's cowardice dressed up as self-awareness. He flinched. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw it. The panic, the shame, the desperation to still be seen as the good guy. His voice softened. I made a mistake. One. And I've been paying for it ever since. No one talks to me anymore. I lost friends. My job's awkward now. Even Jason doesn't return my calls. Isn't that enough? I tilted my head, studying him. You didn't lose those things because of me. You lost them because people saw who you really were. That's not punishment, Alan. That's consequence. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Is there any part of you that still loves me? The question hung there like smoke. Once that would have gutted me. I would have clung to the possibility of reconciliation, tried to find softness in his regret. But now all I felt was distance. No, I said quietly. There's a part of me that pities you. But that's not love. His breath hitched, and for a second I thought he might cry. But he didn't. He just looked away the way people do when they're seeing the end for the first time. You didn't even fight for us, he said finally, his voice breaking on the last word. I adjusted the grocery bag in my hand, stepped around him, and replied, No. I just stopped fighting myself to stay with you. I could feel his stare burning into my back as I walked away. But I didn't turn around. Not once. When I reached my car, I set the bag down, exhaled, and closed my eyes for a moment. The late afternoon sun was sinking behind the lot, washing everything in gold. It felt like standing inside a final chapter 1 that didn't need an exclamation point, just a period. As I pulled out, I glanced once in the mirror. Alan was still standing there, motionless, the wind tugging at his shirt. For the first time, he looked like the thing he'd once accused me of being temporary. I drove home with the windows down. The air was cool, light, and unburdened. No tears, no shaking hands, no regret. Just peace, the quiet, steady kind that feels like justice. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window of my new apartment. The city glowed below like 1,000 untold stories. I thought about how people always imagine closure as a conversation, as if forgiveness requires both parties to agree on the ending. But sometimes closure is one person walking away while the other stays stuck in the scene. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Time didn't heal anything at first. It just gave the pain fewer places to hide. But eventually the ache softened, not because I forgot, but because I stopped needing answers. I got a new apartment, one that smelled like paint and possibility. The walls were bare at first, and the nights were quiet enough to hear the neighbor's dog dreaming. But the stillness didn't scare me anymore. It felt earned. Work got better. I started running in the mornings, learned how to cook for one without feeling lonely about it. There were days when I still thought about him, not in longing but in disbelief. How had I ever mistaken his chaos for passion, his pity for love? It's strange how clear everything looks once the storm has passed. You start seeing the patterns you ignored, the small lies, the half smiles, the way you kept shrinking yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Alan's name still floated around sometimes. A friend of a friend would mention he'd left his job. Someone else said he'd moved back in with his parents for a while. I didn't ask for details, but people offered them anyway. Sienna, the woman he once claimed had ruined him for others, got married that summer. The news spread fast. She'd posted photos of a small ceremony by the lake, her smile untouched by guilt or nostalgia. Alan didn't take it well. That much I heard. He posted a vague quote on Instagram a few weeks later. Some people move on too fast, but karma never sleeps. It barely got any likes. Most of his old friends had already unfollowed him. Jason told me once casually in passing that Alan tried to twist the story one last time, telling people I'd manipulated him. But the screenshots I'd left behind told a different story, and people believed their own eyes. There was no dramatic downfall, no big public reckoning, just a slow, quiet unraveling. And that was enough. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't humiliation, it's exposure, the kind that leaves no audience left to applaud you. I never made a post about what happened, never shared my side online. The proof was there for anyone who needed it, and the rest. I left in silence, because silence, when it belongs to you, becomes power. Months passed, seasons changed. One evening, I found myself walking through the same grocery store parking lot where it all ended. The air smelled like rain, the pavement still warm from the sun. For a second, I half expected to see him standing there again, hands in pockets, rehearsing apologies. But the lot was empty. Just me, a cart, and the echo of a story that no longer needed telling. I smiled. Not the kind you fake for cameras, but the quiet one that sneaks up on you when you realize you've finally let go. Love isn't supposed to feel like survival, and leaving isn't failure sometimes, it's the only honest thing left to do. That night back home, I opened my old laptop. The folder labeled exit plan was still there. I hovered over it for a moment, then hit delete. No hesitation, no ceremony, just a soft click and it was gone. I closed the lid, turned off the lights, and let the darkness settle, not heavy this time, but peaceful. Some people think revenge has to be loud, explosive, a spectacle. But sometimes the most devastating revenge is to simply disappear so completely that they can't tell the story without you. Because one day they'll hear the silence and realize it was never their stage, it was your life. And they've been written out. My name is Evelyn Tucker, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I believe that love was built on patience, loyalty, and quiet understanding. But now looking back, I realize that sometimes love can blind you so completely that you don't notice when it turns into humiliation until it's too late. Ethan and I met in college. He was the kind of man who could charm an entire room without even trying. Ambitious, magnetic, always surrounded by people. I was the quiet one, usually tucked away in the back corner of the lab working on code with my headphones in. Somehow he noticed me. Maybe it was because I wasn't impressed by his charm like everyone else. He said I made him feel grounded. I liked that. We were together for 5 years, engaged for 1. Through all those years, I thought we were a team. When he lost his first job after graduation, I paid the rent for months. I picked up freelance work just to keep us steady. When his father got sick, I was the one who drove him to the hospital every weekend, sat through the long nights, even helped his family when the bills piled up. His mom once called me the glue that kept him together. Back then, I believed in us completely. But love changes quietly like rot under paint. After Ethan got hired at a fast-growing marketing firm, things began to shift. He started surrounding himself with people who lived for attention. Networking events, expensive dinners, endless hustle talk. He began comparing everything: our clothes, our home, even how I spoke in public. "You should dress up more," he'd say. "You need to look like you belong." I'd laugh it off, pretending it didn't sting. Then came that night, the dinner that broke everything. It was one of those elegant, intimidating events his company threw for clients. Ethan told me I had to come because it'll look good for my image. I wasn't thrilled. Corporate small talk wasn't my thing, but I went. I wanted to support him. I even bought a new dress, simple but elegant. When we arrived, he was radiant, laughing, introducing people, slipping easily into the rhythm of the room. I tried to follow his lead, offering polite smiles and handshakes. For a while it went fine. Then I noticed her, Clara. Tall, confident, the kind of woman who doesn't just enter a room, she takes command of it. I'd heard her name before. She'd just gotten promoted. Ethan talked about her constantly. Clara landed another client today. Clara's presentation was flawless. His tone had always been admiring, but that night, admiration turned into something else. He gravitated toward her like a magnet. Their laughter carried across the room. When I tried to join the conversation, the air shifted like I was interrupting a private joke. Clara looked me up and down, smiled politely, then turned back to Ethan. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just work talk, that I shouldn't make a scene. But a few minutes later, when I approached their table with 2 glasses of champagne, Ethan leaned close to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You're embarrassing me," he whispered sharply. "Just pretend we're not together tonight." My hand froze around the glass. At first I thought I misheard, but then he looked at me cold, dismissive, the way you'd look at someone who just doesn't belong. My stomach turned, the room blurred, I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the music. "Pretend we're not together." The words sliced through me like a clean cut, small but deep enough to bleed for years. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply nodded once, turned around, and walked away. For the rest of the night, I sat alone at the bar watching him from across the room, watching the man I loved flirt openly with another woman while pretending I was invisible. The bartender asked if I wanted another drink. I declined. I needed my mind clear, not blurry. He didn't come over once. When the night ended, he found me by the exit, acting as if nothing had happened. "You ready to go?" he asked, like we were still fine. I followed him silently to the car. The drive home was wordless, heavy with everything unsaid. That whisper, those 4 words, played in my head over and over like a broken record. "You're embarrassing me." I couldn't stop replaying the years behind us. The late nights helping him prepare for interviews. The weekends spent supporting his family. The sacrifices I made so he could chase his dreams. All of it felt erased in one cruel whisper. When we got home, he didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just went to bed. I sat in the living room staring at the wall, wondering when exactly love had turned into shame. I wish I could say I confronted him right then, that I demanded an answer. But the truth is, I didn't. I was too stunned, too hollow. I told myself maybe it was stress, maybe I'd misunderstood. But deep down I knew. Something had shifted permanently. That night, as I lay awake beside him staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. He hadn't just embarrassed me, he'd erased me. And for the first time in 5 years, I started to wonder who I really was without him. The days after that dinner felt like walking through fog. Everything was muted, muffled, unreal. Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. He'd hum in the kitchen, scroll his phone during breakfast, tell me about some client or project like we hadn't crossed a line that night. I watched him closely, waiting for an apology, for any flicker of regret, but none came. I tried to bring it up once, gently. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What you said that night at the dinner. Why did you say that?" He didn't look up from his laptop. "Oh, come on, Evelyn. Don't start," he sighed. "You know how these events are. I just needed to keep things professional. You're overthinking it." Professional. That word hung in the air, stinging more than the whisper itself. I wanted to ask professional with whom, Clara. But I swallowed the question. I didn't want to sound jealous. Still, something inside me began to ache in a place words couldn't reach. His phone was glued to his hand, his smile too quick to fade when I entered the room. He started working late client dinners that always ended near midnight. When I asked if I could join one sometime, he chuckled softly. "You wouldn't enjoy it. It's not your scene." Not my scene. I remembered when we used to be each other's scene movie nights on the couch, cheap takeout, laughing until midnight over nothing. Now it was like living with a stranger who was pretending to remember who I was. A few weeks later, it finally happened. We were home on a Sunday night. I was cooking dinner the way I always did. The scent of garlic filled the kitchen, warm and safe. Ethan sat at the counter, scrolling his phone, tapping his fingers. His silence had weight to it, deliberate, heavy. "Ethan," I said quietly, "can we talk?" He looked up, bored. "About what?" "That dinner. The distance between us. You've been different." He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smiled a smile that wasn't kind. "Different, Evelyn, I've just grown. You're comfortable, and that's fine, but some of us want more than comfort. Clara understands that." It took a second for my brain to catch up. "What about Clara?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, like we were discussing weather. "We've been talking for a while. She's ambitious-driven. She challenges me. You used to be that way, remember? But lately you just exist." I froze. "Are you saying you're seeing her?" His tone was calm, almost clinical. "Emotionally, yes. Physically, recently, it just happened." He said it like a confession to a therapist, detached and self-justified. I stared at him, a fork still in my hand. "Why tell me now?" "Because I owe you honesty," he said. "Clara pushes me to be better. You're holding me back with your predictability. I need someone who matches my energy, not someone who plays it safe." Predictable, holding him back. The words fell on me like cold rain. I thought of every night I'd stayed awake helping him rehearse presentations, the weekends I'd skipped outings so I could drive him to his dad's treatments, the career opportunities I'd turned down so we could stay near his family. I'd built a life around his comfort, and he was calling me the cage. I placed the fork down gently. "So what happens now?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm moving out. Claire and I found a place downtown. You'll be fine, Evelyn. You always are." That line, "you'll be fine," burned worse than betrayal. He was already packing himself out of my life, and he had the nerve to say it like I was some project that would run on autopilot after he left. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something deeper than anger took over, something still and quiet. "All right," I said. My voice low but even. "If that's what you want, I'll help you pack." For the first time, his composure cracked. "You're not going to beg me to stay." I looked at him, the man I'd loved for 5 years, the man I'd believed in, now looking at me like a ghost he'd already buried. "No," I said. "You've made your choice. I won't fight for someone who doesn't want to be here." The silence that followed was suffocating. He blinked, maybe expecting tears, but none came. I turned away before he could see the way my jaw trembled. That night I packed his clothes, neatly folded his shirts, and set his belongings by the door. He left the next morning without saying goodbye. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the apartment, hollow and final. When I walked back into the bedroom, the empty side of the bed stared at me like a wound. All I could think about was that whisper, "Pretend we're not together tonight." Now I finally understood what it meant. He'd already been pretending long before he said it. But if he wanted me to disappear, I would, just not in the way he expected. I didn't know it then, but that quiet nod I gave him, that refusal to beg, would be the beginning of his unraveling. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the first sound of someone reclaiming their power. The first week after Ethan left, the silence was unbearable. Not the peaceful kind that wraps around you like a blanket. This was the sharp kind, the kind that echoes. Every corner of the apartment still smelled like him. His cologne lingered on the pillows, his coffee mug sat untouched by the sink. I didn't touch anything at first. I walked through those rooms like a stranger visiting a crime scene, trying to understand what went wrong. The bed felt too big. Meals felt pointless. Even music, something I used to love, became unbearable. Every song seemed to know his name. But the strangest thing was how the world kept moving. His friends stopped calling. Mutual acquaintances pretended not to know what happened. And on social media, the truth played out like a movie I wasn't cast in. There he was smiling, arm around Clara, champagne in hand. The captions were nauseating new beginnings. Found my match. Finally free. Free. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was how effortlessly he replaced me, how he turned our history into a stepping stone for his next performance. For a while I didn't eat properly. Work became my anchor. I'd code for hours, eyes fixed to the screen, anything to drown out the images of him and her. My coworkers noticed the change, the silence, the forced smiles, but I brushed it off. Just tired, I'd say. Deadlines. Nights were the hardest. Sometimes I'd wake up reaching for a body that wasn't there. Sometimes I'd dream he came back, that I'd hear the key turn in the lock and he'd say I made a mistake. But morning always came, and reality stayed cruelly consistent. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. I looked exhausted. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, a ghost of someone who used to be steady. That image jolted something awake inside me. I whispered out loud, "No more pretending." It was strange, the same words he once used to erase me now felt like a challenge. I wasn't going to pretend I was fine. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't matter. If he could rebuild his life, so could I, only this time for me. So I started small. I cleaned the apartment top to bottom, erasing his presence inch by inch. I boxed up his forgotten things, a jacket, a book, an old toothbrush, and dropped them at his office front desk without a note. Then I changed the locks. The next morning I deleted my social media. Not to hide, but to reclaim peace. No more doom scrolling through the highlight reel of someone who had discarded me. No more looking for closure in captions. Instead, I went outside. At first it felt strange walking through the park alone, noticing sunlight, listening to the sound of leaves crunch underfoot. I realized I'd forgotten what quiet joy felt like. That week I signed up for a hiking group. I told myself I'd cancel later, but I didn't. On that first hike, my lungs burned, my legs ached, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. Surrounded by strangers, I wasn't Ethan's girlfriend or the woman who got left for Clara. I was just Evelyn. It became a ritual. Every weekend, I hiked a little farther, climbed a little higher. Somewhere along the trail, between exhaustion and peace, I began to remember who I was before love became sacrifice. I started cooking again. Not the kind of meals that catered to his tastes, but things I actually enjoyed. I bought flowers for myself, painted the walls a lighter shade, rearranged the furniture. Each small change felt like taking back one more piece of myself. At work, I began thriving again. My focus sharpened, my projects stood out. A senior developer noticed my consistency and offered me a promotion, the same one I'd turned down a year ago because Ethan didn't want me to travel. This time I said yes. Meanwhile, whispers about Ethan began to surface. A coworker who was still connected to that world mentioned it casually during lunch. "You heard about Ethan and Clara, total chaos." I didn't ask, but they continued anyway. Apparently, Clara had been making scenes at work, accusing Ethan of taking credit for her ideas. Management was involved. Rumors of tension, shouting matches, and missed deadlines. Ethan's perfect life wasn't so perfect anymore. That night, I sat by the window sipping tea. I didn't smile, but I didn't feel sad either. I just felt done. I realized something profound. I didn't need to wish him pain or karma. The universe didn't need my help. He was already living inside the consequences of his choices. And me, I was finally living outside the shadow of his validation. Months passed. My world became full again. New projects, new hobbies, new peace. I wasn't healed completely, but I was healing, and that mattered more. Sometimes I'd pass by places we used to go, the cafe where we'd sit for hours, the bookstore where he first kissed me, and I'd feel a brief ache like pressing on an old bruise. But then I'd breathe, remind myself, you're not her anymore. You survived. Ethan wanted me to pretend I wasn't with him that night. So I did. And I've kept pretending ever since, pretending he no longer exists. And the best part, the longer I pretend, the more it feels real. Because in every way that matters, he's gone. By the time 6 months had passed, Ethan had become little more than a faded photograph in my memory. Edges, curling colors, washed out. I no longer checked his social media or asked mutual friends how he was doing. But life has a way of sending echoes even when you've stopped listening. One evening, after a long day at work, I got a message from an old coworker of his, someone who had once been friendly to both of us. You probably don't care, but Ethan's in trouble. Clara's been tearing him apart at work. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put the phone down, poured a glass of water, and went about my evening. I didn't reply. Still, that text stayed in my mind like a distant thundercloud, not close enough to fear, but loud enough to notice. Over the next few weeks, the whispers grew louder. Even people I barely spoke to mentioned his name. Apparently, the golden couple had tarnished fast. Clara's ambition, the very thing Ethan admired, had turned into manipulation. She'd been jealous of his clients possessive during meetings, accusing him of flirting when he wasn't. Their fights became public, their coworkers uncomfortable. Then came the breaking point. Ethan was passed over for a promotion, one he'd bragged about months earlier. Clara got it instead. The irony was perfect. He had left me because I was too comfortable, too predictable. Now he was the one being replaced by someone who played the game better. A week later, he texted me. Ethan. Hey, stranger. Been a while. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the screen, feeling absolutely nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a blank calm. Then I deleted the message without replying. A few days later, another one came. Ethan. I know I messed up. Clara's not who I thought she was. Can we talk? Maybe grab coffee? I almost laughed. The man who once told me to pretend we weren't together was now pretending we still had something left to discuss. I didn't respond. But the texts didn't stop. They multiplied, small, desperate bursts over weeks. Some were apologetic. I miss our talks. Some were defensive. You're really going to ignore me after everything. Some turned bitter. You think you're better than me now. It was fascinating watching his words collapse from arrogance to pleading to resentment. I didn't block him at first, not out of hope, but curiosity. I wanted to see just how far he'd fall. Then his family joined in. His brother called one evening, his tone cautious. Evelyn, he's not doing well. Clara left him. He lost his job. Maybe you could talk to him. I bit back a sigh. Talk to him about what? How to rebuild a life he destroyed himself. Please, his brother said softly. He really regrets what he did. I paused. The truth was, I didn't believe in revenge. I didn't need to see him suffer. But hearing that he was finally facing consequences, it didn't hurt. Tell him I wish him peace, I said, but I'm not his solution anymore. That night, I lay in bed thinking about all the ways he used to look down on me, my quietness, my lack of flash, my preference for simple things. He thought he was ascending when he left me. But sometimes the climb you're proudest of turns out to be the one that leads straight off a cliff. I didn't hear from him for a while after that. Life went on. I focused on my projects, my hikes, my small circle of friends. Then out of nowhere, another text. Ethan, I saw your name in an article. Congrats on the app launch. You've done amazing. I'm really proud of you. Pride. From the same man who once called me embarrassing. I smiled to myself, not out of joy, but quiet recognition that I had finally stepped beyond his reach. I blocked his number that night. But when you finally close one door, life sometimes sends you through another. At work, during a tech conference in Seattle, I met Daniel, a data engineer, with an easy laugh and the kind of calm confidence that doesn't demand attention. He was kind without trying to prove it. We spent hours talking about everything from coding to hiking trails. When I mentioned I liked being out in nature alone, he smiled. You sound like someone who's learned to enjoy her own company. I remember thinking yes, and it took losing everything to get here. Daniel didn't rush things. He didn't demand explanations about my past or make me feel like I had to earn affection through performance. Our connection grew quietly, a gentle rhythm instead of a race. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Then came another test. Ethan showed up again, not in person, but through a friend request. New account, new profile. His display picture was an old one, him smiling like he still had control over his narrative. I ignored it, but the request stayed there for days, a digital ghost hovering at the edge of my peace. One night, Daniel and I were cooking dinner when my phone buzzed again, another number I didn't recognize. Unknown. You think you've won, don't you? You think ignoring me makes you better. I froze. Daniel noticed immediately. Everything okay? I forced a smile and deleted the message. It's nothing. But deep down, I knew exactly who it was. Ethan was unraveling, and this time he wanted me to watch. I turned off my phone, exhaled slowly, and looked at Daniel. He grinned as he plated the food, humming under his breath, utterly unaware of the storm outside my past. And for the first time, I realized how powerful peace really is. Not the kind that comes from revenge, but the kind that grows when you finally stop caring who's watching. Ethan's world was cracking. Mine was blooming. And all I had to do was nothing at all. 9 months after Ethan walked out of my life, I received an invitation that would bring everything full circle. Alex's wedding. One of our old mutual friends. At first, I almost didn't go. I knew Ethan might be there. The thought of seeing him again made something inside me tense, not out of fear, but the unease of revisiting a ghost you've finally learned to live without. But Alex was persistent. Evelyn, you should come. You've grown so much. You deserve to celebrate with us. And don't worry, he added quietly. You'll handle it better than he will. He was right. I had no reason to hide anymore. So I went wearing a soft emerald dress that fit like quiet confidence, my hair pinned back, my heart steady. Daniel came with me, his hand finding mine as naturally as breathing. He was my calm in every storm, but tonight, I didn't even need that calm. I had built my own. The wedding was held in a beautiful outdoor garden, sunlight spilling through the trees like gold. Laughter floated in the air, music weaving between tables, the scent of flowers, thick with life. It was the kind of evening that reminded you endings can make room for beginnings. I was talking with some old friends when I saw him. Ethan. He stood near the bar, thinner, older eyes heavy. His confidence, that polished, effortless glow he used to wear, was gone. Even from across the garden, I could see the exhaustion in his shoulders. His suit didn't fit right. His smile was forced. He noticed me almost instantly. His gaze lingered longer than I expected, searching maybe for guilt, maybe for permission to approach. I gave him neither. Daniel noticed the shift in my expression and leaned close. That's him, isn't it? I nodded once. That's him. You okay? I've never been better, I said, and I meant it. An hour passed before Ethan finally approached. I was standing near the dessert table talking with Alex's wife when he appeared beside me, hesitant hands in his pockets. Evelyn, he said softly, hey. I turned slowly, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Ethan. He looked at me for a long moment, his voice faltering. You look great, really great. Thank you, I replied simply. His eyes flicked toward Daniel, who stood a few steps away chatting with another guest. So you're with someone? Yes, I said. Daniel. Right, he muttered. I've heard about him. Seems nice. There was an awkward pause, the kind heavy enough to make air feel thick. Finally, he sighed. Can we talk? Just privately. It won't take long. Every instinct told me to refuse, but something in me wanted closure, not for him, for myself. So I nodded once and followed him a few steps away toward a quieter corner by the garden lights. He looked nervous. His voice shook. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need to say this. I lost everything, Evelyn. My job, my apartment, Clara. I cut him off gently. Clara left. He nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. Yeah, she cheated on me. With someone from work. Turns out she's not who I thought she was. Guess I got what I deserved. He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. When things fell apart, I kept thinking about you. About how good you were to me. How steady. I ruined the best thing I ever had. There it was, the line I once dreamed of hearing. But instead of satisfaction, I felt only distance. I watched him closely. His eyes were red tired. There was no spark of the man I once loved, only a shadow of his former pride. You told me to pretend we weren't together that night, I said softly. Remember? He blinked, shame rippling across his face. Evelyn, I didn't mean it like that. But you did, I interrupted gently. You said it. You wanted me invisible, so I learned how to be. I learned how to live without being seen, and somewhere in that silence I found myself. His throat tightened. I know I hurt you. I was stupid. I thought I needed more excitement, ambition. But you were everything. You were home. I let out a slow breath. Home isn't somewhere you abandon when you get bored, Ethan. You left because you mistook stability for dullness. You called love comfortable, like it was an insult. But comfort, real comfort, is what people spend their whole lives searching for. He took a step closer. Can we start over? Please, I've changed. I'm trying to fix things. I looked at him, truly looked. His apology wasn't manipulation this time, it was brokenness. But forgiveness and reunion aren't the same thing. No, I said quietly, we can't. You told me to pretend we weren't together. I did, and I've kept pretending ever since. Now it's not pretending anymore, it's just the truth. He blinked hard, his composure slipping. So that's it. After everything we were. I smiled sadly. We're strangers now, Ethan, just like you wanted. Behind me, the music shifted, a slow song, starting laughter spilling from the dance floor. Daniel caught my eye from across the garden. He lifted his hand slightly wordlessly, asking if I was okay. I nodded. Ethan followed my gaze. His jaw tightened. Is he better than me? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said softly, he doesn't have to be. He's just kind. That broke him. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment I almost felt sorry. Almost. He whispered, I lost everything, Evelyn. I looked at him one last time, calm and steady. No, Ethan, you threw everything away. And with that, I turned and walked back toward the music. Daniel reached out his hand when I returned his thumb, brushing lightly over my knuckles. All good, he asked. All good, I said, smiling genuinely this time. As we began to dance beneath the string lights, I caught a glimpse of Ethan standing alone near the bar, watching. His reflection shimmered faintly in a window behind him, small, distant, swallowed by the glow of everyone else's joy. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. He became exactly what he told me to be, invisible. And me, I became everything he thought I wasn't, confident, alive, unashamed. In a way, it was poetic justice. He had tried to erase me from his story. Instead, I'd outgrown his pages entirely. Later, as Daniel and I walked to the car, the city lights danced on the windshield. He squeezed my hand and said quietly, You handled that beautifully. I smiled, looking out at the skyline. No revenge, no anger, just peace. He nodded. That's the best ending, isn't it? Yes, I whispered. The ending where I finally stopped pretending. And as the car pulled away, I realized that the whisper that once broke me had become my greatest gift because it taught me how to listen to my own voice again.